I distinctly remember being a few years into my job as a manager and having to ask my boss, what exactly is my job? She had to tell me, managing the team is the job. Hi, I'm Brett the Audi Boss, and on this channel we talk about ADHD and autism in the workplace. I'm Brett. I have over 12 years leadership training and experience, and I also have a formal diagnosis of ADHD and autism. I had been such a technical, hands-on both manager but employee for so long that excelling at all those tasks and roles and doing all those things at such an incredible rate and speed the way that I could with my autism and ADHD, those were the things that got me promoted and got me into a leadership and management position. So when the time came for me to hand over those roles and those tasks and those responsibilities to the team that I was managing, I really struggled because I didn't really know what my identity was as a manager and what I was supposed to be doing when I was handing out all those roles to my team who were amazing at doing those jobs. But I was struggling to figure out how to do that without micromanaging them and without looking too closely over their shoulder at all the things that they were trying to do and sort of not being like, well, I would do it this way if I were you. It wasn't until into my diagnosis I started to process it was because of AuDHD that I was struggling to comprehend those shifts and those changes. Which is why I'm so excited to be talking to Dr. Bowen Marshall about a recent article that they wrote on Substack about AuDHD leaders. Dr. Bowen Marshall, PhD, is a licensed psychotherapist and career coach specializing in autism, ADHD, and neurodivergent career development. As a part of his work, he helps neurodivergents navigate the complexities of career demands, helping ADHDers, AuDHDers, and autistics find and create workflow systems and leadership styles that help them succeed and thrive at work and life. Dr. Marshall recently wrote about the struggles of AuDHD leaders, and it felt almost like they were reporting back on my leadership growth as an AuDHD leader, and it felt spot on to everything that I had experienced in my growth path of being an AuDHD leader that I really was eager to speak with Bowen. In this conversation, we cover a lot of ground where we talk about unspoken corporate rules, being seen as warm and competent, and the difference between masking and code switching. We started our conversation off with something that a lot of us know well, and that's being really good at your job and getting promoted into something completely different because of how good you were.
You know, what I think about a lot for people with autism and AuDHD is a lot of times the neurodivergent brain is great at specific tasks. So people who are great at technical skill, I think about my friends who are in the tech sector and HR, they talk about there is the leadership management progression, and then there's the specialized skill progression, you know, engineer 1, senior engineer 1, senior engineer 2. And that when you're in a job doing a technical skill, you can get really good at that. And people tend to get promoted into leadership positions because people are like, oh, you're good at the technical skill. You'll be great at leading people at that technical skill.
Yeah.
Not realizing those are fundamentally different skills.
Yeah. I see that all the time in the corporate structure. And it's a lot of times what it is it's somebody is well liked, or they feel like you've paid your dues, or they specifically think, well, there's no other way to give you a revenue increase for your compensation. And so the natural stage for this individual, regardless of their management strength, they're technically very good at their job. So we're going to promote them to the next level. And then it's a disservice to both the team that they manage and the individual themselves.
There was an article at Harvard Business Review that looked at, I think, 7 different leadership styles. And one of the things that I've found most of my autistic colleagues have fallen into is the Pacesetter leadership style.
Yeah.
Because how do you get promoted? You outperform everyone else, right? Your neurodivergent brain is able to tackle things and produce in ways that neurotypical people can't. And so you get there and you think, oh, well, that's why they promoted me. They must want me to perform at that level, to drive in that way with other people.
Yeah.
Almost all of my colleagues who are ADHD or autistic are the hardest workers I've ever seen. But they equate how they come to work, the ways they invest in work, with how everyone must value work.
Yeah.
And the truth is, they don't.
Yeah. Yeah. I think one of the struggles for me when I was in that moment myself is I kept coming back to my boss and saying, I don't really understand what my role is now that I've been promoted, because I'm so used to doing that technical stuff. And that struggle of, but I don't get the job. And it took me a couple of years to finally, my boss was like, managing the team is the job. It's not like, yes, you could do all these amazing technical things and you're really good at that. That's sort of like the back burner part of the job. The job is now managing and leading the team. That's the job. It took me years to figure that out. And I needed someone to really like spell that out for me concretely for me to sort of get it. And it wasn't until then that I realized that I was sort of struggling with a lot of rigidity of expectations for the people that I was managing at that time. How can we kind of be more tuned into or attuned to that rigidity that we may be putting out there?
Well, look, if I ask you, did you get clear ascension? I mean, so for me, right, I am diagnosed with ADHD. I have a lot of autistic traits. And I very much so early in my career was the Pacesetter style because I would knock something out of the park and they'd be like, oh, well then lead this and here's a person. But I was expected to manage a person while also performing a lot of technical roles.
Yes.
And so that was the confusing thing because the things that got me prominence were my own technical experiences. And then it's like, we want you to expand this and lead too. And so in many ways, before I can answer this question about what the warning signs or the issues of rigidity, no, my rigidity, my ability to perform consistently still got me recognition and got me more promotions, almost in a way that managing others didn't.
Yeah. That was the same thing for me because I could perform those tasks in my sleep. Those were my special interests. Those were where my hyper focus would go. And my frustration with the then team that I was managing or the people that I had to bring along with me was they couldn't perform at the in-depth monotrope style level that I could go to. And that would make me wildly frustrated because then I'd have to come out of a hyper focus, explain all of my thinking, and have to bring people along with me. And it took me a little while to realize I need to stop being sort of the expert and I need to be a teacher. I need to do more teaching because then I can grow this team out. And then it took me a while to have that click in my head of going, okay, if I embolden them, if I strengthen them, if I teach them, well, now I have all these people that can kind of do the vision that I'm trying to achieve, can work collaboratively with me to get there. It took me so long to get to that point. But when I got there, that's when everything shifted for me.
That's the curriculum that we're talking about.
Yeah.
That is not given to people who, quite frankly, one of my early mentors gave me kind of like messed up advice, but I also kind of respect it. She said, don't be too good at your job.
Yeah.
And I was like, why? And she said, because if you're too good at your job and you're not focused on being seen by others, getting in rooms, finding advocates, taking stretch projects, people will keep you in roles that make their lives easier.
Yeah.
And not offer you opportunities that expand your role, that they say, oh, actually, maybe you could make my life easier because if I move up, you can move up too. They're not thinking about it. They're just like, no, you are great in this technical role. When I pass on to someone else, you'll also be the gift I give that next person. Well, I think before we can even talk about mentorship versus sponsorship, right, which are completely different things.
Yeah.
We have to talk about how do you describe the corporate culture that people are getting themselves into? What are the rules that you kind of have to know and learn before we can even talk about wanting a promotion?
Yeah. That's really what a lot of us struggle with are those unspoken rules because you're sort of learning trial by fire. And, I was just having a coaching conversation with somebody yesterday who actively wants to go into a corporate structure right now and isn't totally sure about how to navigate those because we can tend to show up trying to be helpful, trying to be, focused on the project and getting something done, not always realizing that there might be someone who is kind of giving you a leading question only to find out you've done something wrong or you don't know you've done something wrong. So just sort of diagnosing sort of what those unspoken rules are can be so difficult for us to navigate.
Well, I think unspoken rules are based on unspoken systems. And I often think about this, like starting with unspoken rules. Most companies that you go into, regardless of your role, if it's HR, if it's technology, they're trying to sell something.
Yeah.
And so you need to figure out, if that's the case, how your role supports selling more things.
Yeah.
Right. So if you're in HR, it's likely how do you recruit optimal talent that's going to sell more things?
Hmm.
How do you manage out people who cause too much of a disruption to the enterprise of selling things? And right, when you are autistic or ADHD and you have strong social justice orientation, you may get hyper focused on the person that says some sleazy things, not realizing that sleazy person is selling insurance and sells more insurance than the next 5 insurance salesmen times 5. So I think before we can talk about the implicit rules, you've got to talk about the implicit power structures, right? What are we trying to do? And that companies are not these ephemeral things that kind of float on their own. I know with all the talk of the federal government and the deep state, right? Like entrenched bureaucracy is one thing, but most private companies aren't bureaucracies. And so to me, I also think, like, no matter what size company you're at, it's who's the person that set up all of the rules of engagement. And I think if you can focus on what does the company actually do that makes money, that keeps it viable, that makes it grow, and who is the person, or usually no more than 2 people who are really running the show, and what do they think, that sets you up for far more success than all of the noise I think bottom-up processors want to focus on.
How do we navigate sort of both the trying to sell ourselves, but also fit into the ethos?
Well, I go back to Vanessa Van Edwards. I think she's someone that really distills down a lot of social dynamics through social research that I think is fantastic for questions like this. And one of the data points she presents again and again in multiple videos I've seen her in is that 82% of first impressions are based off 2 factors: warmth and competence. Am I friendly? Am I not going to hurt you? And am I trustworthy? Do I follow through on what I say I'm going to do, and do I do it well? And, I think when you focus on those 2 factors, a lot of times what happens for autistic people, because I always think of like the Cassandra Effect, like the curse of knowing the future, but then no one believes you, right? Being strong pattern recognizers is you may be 4 or 5 steps ahead. And so I think if you follow in that domain of being autistic or ADHD, you have to try and figure out, okay, I'm at this step. What step are they at? I don't actually want to get more than 1, maybe 1.5, 2 steps ahead. If I'm 4 steps ahead, because right in the Cassandra Effect, it's that people will preference group cohesion's feeling of liking each other over, and group beliefs over a feeling of confronting a piece of information that conflicts with that group's worldview. And so as opposed to sitting with the discomfort of, oh, maybe like we're headed towards a cliff, it's, I don't like you for bringing that message. So the first thing is not getting too far ahead. And so then, right, the other piece, right, is that if you come across as too competent without being warmed, I'm friendly, I like you, I'm in this with you, I'm trying to make your job easier, you come off as, I am coming to your job and you're an idiot. And so I think autistic people, even before we start talking about affect and prosody and all those things, really have to think about, like, okay, am I overcoding on this because it's comfortable, because it's my special interest, and not thinking enough about what signs of warmth do they need? Is it remembering a fact about their daughter's play and recalling that, right? Versus, right, like, and we talk about gender dynamics, women often have to overcode on competence because if they overcode on warmth, that sends signals, whether or not they're actually sending those signals, that somehow they're being flirtatious. And so thinking about those 2 factors, I think, really simplifies the work that you're trying to do in the workplace.
I almost kind of get into that Chicken Little, the sky is falling, because you can see all those 4 steps out and it's coming rapidly, but you're absolutely right. They don't want to hear it. They don't want to hear those 4 steps out. They want to hear just the one now, or they do feel threatened and they do feel like you're overreacting, or how do we contain ourselves? Because like for me, there's an excitability to like, oh my God, I got to tell them this thing is happening before it's too late. How do I tell them? Like, how do I contain that?
So I think the first thing I look for when I enter an organization is anybody standing up? People who've been here longer than me, do they say novel things or do they just agree with the person who has the most power in the room? Again, going back to who has the most power in the room to ask that question. But I think once it's assessed that like, okay, yeah, people do stand up. There are people, do you give them a choice? Do you say, hey, I'm new here. And I sometimes say things that, not hubris, tend to bear out, but they tend to be a little further along than what people want to hear. So do you want to hear the next half step? Or do you want to hear 4 steps out that may be so disconcerting, you want to shoot the messenger and not focus on the ideas? And please tell me which one you'd like to hear, because I want to make sure I'm being appropriate for what this meeting is.
Yeah.
I guess what's the difference in your mind definitionally between masking and code switch?
I mean, it's definitely, you're jumping through a significant mental gymnastics just to do that.
And see, I think I would say that masking is about managing arousal, particularly in autism hyperarousal, and needing to calm down. And code switching takes that you are managing your arousal for granted, and you're just pivoting based on what the audience needs. So for instance, I was in a session the other day, and because of my sound stimulus, I had a client who was crying. And not just crying, they were very high-pitched wailing. Now that particular sound, I love working with this client. We have a great history, but immediately I felt my pulse shoot up.
Yeah.
I just felt angry because there is a tone of like crying. If animals do it, babies do it, where I just...
Yeah, I know that tone.
It's that sound. It's like, it must be my misophonia, but it's just like I have felt, and it makes me like angry.
Yeah.
And so there I'm like, oh shit. Okay. You know what this is? This is your autonomic nervous system, sensory autism response. Okay. Breathe, look away. I'd already told this client, right, that I sometimes have sound issues. Turn down the volume on the computer so you're able to, even maybe like turn on closed captioning so I can hear words, I can see words, but I'm not being so triggered by the crying. And this took me a long time to figure out. And I'm a therapist. Like that was really hard because I thought I was just a terrible person, terrible therapist. No, it's the autism, right?
Yeah.
And so there's that, the masking. And that session took way more out of me than other sessions where that doesn't happen. And then there's code switching on top of it. Who I am in session, the types of advice I give, the tone of voice I use, the way I respond, the way I don't respond, right? I'm much less reactive in a session. I'm going to use this voice. I'm going to lean in. I'm going to be moderated because what I'm doing is I'm signaling that if you pay attention and your mirror neurons activate, you're going to be calmer because I'm calm. Versus if I was out in my real life, I might go, just like, which is not helpful, right? So that's what I mean by those 2 layers. One is managing my autonomic hyperarousal response. The other one is managing, okay, how do I want to conduct myself in this forum?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great way of kind of explaining it because you're right. Because when I would do crisis communications and I would have to work with a, very high level ranking person in a company, there was very much a much calmer demeanor that I would take into the room with me. And I would really kind of keep everything contained much more. Speak more slowly, speak more gently, slowly parcel out pieces of information, wait for them to react, and then go, okay, but there's a little bit more now. And then sort of like rank where the priorities of the crisis information needed to be disclosed. And then once we had everything contained, then in a similar way, that would take a lot out of me. I'd leave that room and I'm like, my shoulders would come down and I would like have to go collapse for, 10 or 15 minutes. Cause it's just like, cause there's a lot of hand holding that has to be done when you're in a situation similar to that.
It's a lot. It's a lot, even if you're not masking, but when you add that masking level to it, I think the awareness of those 2 processes, code switching and masking, you've got to ask yourself as a neurodivergent person, because companies are not built for social justice. Even if the right Plan B corporations where they have a responsibility in addition to fiduciary responsibility to stockholders. I think, what's the company? It's an outdoor REI.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
That has like a responsibility to its employees and to give back to the environment in addition, right? Like companies are not structured for social justice. They're structured for maximizing profit.
Yeah.
And so I think one of the hard trade-offs and why I keep going back to AuDHD is not pathology. It's an inability to function as optimally as they would like us to in a system that was not built for our brains. And in that definition, it's pathological to that system for sure.
Yeah.
But that I think so many of us go on to become entrepreneurs if we can manage to do that, which again is hard in capitalism.
Yes, it is.
Because we realize that if we have a little more control over our environments, that we don't have to mask as much, we do just fine code switching.
I mean, I think some of us get really, really good at it, but over time, I mean, it's a huge contributor to burnout because it really builds and builds and builds because there needs to be an outlet. There needs to be another side to that. My thanks to Dr. Bowen Marshall, PhD, for his time today. If you'd like to learn more about Bowen, or be sure to follow him on Substack, YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok, check out the description below where I've put all the links where you can connect with Bowen even more. Please be sure to check out his Substack. There's incredible writing happening there. I love everything Bowen's writing about and talking about, and it pretty much always resonates with me every time. Thanks for watching. Be sure to check out part 2 in this conversation, which will be coming up soon. You'll want to like and subscribe so you don't miss that, and be sure to check out some of the other videos while you're here. Be sure to like and subscribe. It really does help my channel grow. And be sure to also check out the newly launched AuDBoss YouTube shop. You can click on one of the tabs around here to see some of the things that I've got there. And I hope that you'll check out the podcast and the Substack, which are extensions of all this work that we're doing here as well. Thanks for watching.